It's my sincere honor to turn it over to Secretary Buttigieg and once again thank him and his entire team for their commitment to Vermont and helping us through our time of need. Being here has sent a powerful message, and we're so very grateful. Mr. Secretary.
Well, I want to thank Governor Scott for your leadership, for showing us not just the scene of what needs attention and support here, but also helping to show us that resilience that you described among the people of Vermont. And there's no doubt in my mind, as you said, that these communities and this state will recover stronger than ever. I want to recognize Senator Welch, who was with us earlier today, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders. I have been in touch with both of them, as well as Governor Scott throughout this process, and also Representative Balint, who was with us as we were meeting with people who have been impacted and visiting impacted communities. I want to thank all of the state and local leaders who are joining us here, our Federal Highway Administrator, Shailen Bhatt, and his team, as well as all of our DOT personnel, FEMA, who have been so central to this response, and most importantly, want to join the governor in acknowledging the first responders who have worked tirelessly across the state and region for the last week, who have rescued hundreds of residents and facing one of the worst natural disasters to hit this region in a century, exemplifying the bravery and the responsibility that people feel here to look after one another. And that might be the biggest takeaway that I've seen here, is that readiness to step up. I've seen cooperation across various lines that can sometimes get in the way of getting good work done. I've seen people working across jurisdictional lines, across different layers of government, across party lines, and across any other barrier that could get in the way. And tearing down obstacles, literally and physically, is going to be the name of the game and part of what we, with our piece of the puzzle at the DOT, want to be helpful with as well. Last week, President Biden approved a major disaster declaration for Vermont, and he ordered a whole-of-government effort to assist those state and local-led recovery efforts. As Vermont moves from the mode of immediate response to long-term recovery and begins the hard work of rebuilding from this disaster, I want to emphasize that the entire federal government, including the U.S. Department of Transportation, stands ready to continue to assist any way we can. When Vermont puts in its request for DOT emergency relief funds, we will do everything that we can to get those dollars here quickly and to be with you for the long haul, just as our department has been doing, as the governor noted, in the response to Hurricane Irene after 2011. In fact, in the years following that disaster, our Federal Highway Administration has provided more than $180 million in emergency relief funds to help repair the vital infrastructure that was damaged or destroyed by that storm, and we're going to do whatever we can this time as well. Of course, it's important to note that Vermont has endured two storms that would be called once-in-a-century events in the span of just 12 years. And I recall from my time as mayor of South Bend what it was like when we had two events come within 2 years that should have been once every few hundred years. It feels like every few weeks we see a new flood, storm, heat wave, drought. It's not lost on me that our skies are hazy because of wildfires that are of a nature and severity that should not be an annual event, and yet here we are. Americans are seeing the results of climate change with our own eyes and dealing with the consequences. So, as elected leaders, our most important duty has to be the safety and security of the people we serve, including when it comes to climate resilience. And in terms of transportation, that means making sure that our infrastructure is built to withstand the extreme weather that's happening more and more often and showing itself to be more and more extreme. Just a couple of months ago, through President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, we've been able to open applications for the first round of a new program designed to make our highways, transit, ports, and rail systems more resilient in the face of extreme weather, called the PROTECT program. And the application window for that program closes on August 18th. So I want to encourage any local governments, tribal governments, state DOTs. Certainly I expect this region to produce competitive applications. I want to invite everybody to take a look at that program. when disasters like this happen, in addition to the cost measured in lives and livelihoods, the cost to infrastructure is very real and very clear. First responders depend on roads and bridges to do their job in an emergency. And of course, everybody relies on them to get to where they need to be, to get to work, to check on loved ones. And we know that we need to rebuild the infrastructure so that people in this region can rebuild their lives. And that's the work that we are here to help with. Again, Governor and your team, I want to thank you for your service to the people of Vermont during this difficult time. And I want everyone to know that across this administration, we will have your backs as Vermonters do everything to rebuild and recover. Thanks again for inviting us to be here.
Mr. Secretary, I know you're on a tight time frame, but we'd like to take a few questions if we could. Sure thing.
Secretary, when we get to the point of the USDOT actually distributing funds to Vermont, how will the department make sure that those funds are distributed equitably, particularly in the areas?
Well, with emergency relief funding, there are two layers to that funding. What's called quick release, which is to get dollars out quickly, and then there's the reimbursable basis for the longer run. And that is based on the request that comes in from the state. And I know this is a state that's paying a lot of attention to making sure different communities are served well. The governor was pointing out the economic hardship that a lot of the communities we saw have already been through. We were looking at how areas like Woodbury and Hardwick are trying to use tourism and recreation to build an economy that's been through a lot. We saw Barry, and I know that there's been a lot of concern here. Obviously, our administration cares deeply about equity as well. And sometimes that means racial equity. Sometimes that means making sure rural areas or economically underserved areas are being taken care of. And I would emphasize that's not just something that is important to consider as you're ensuring everybody who is hardest hit in a storm or disaster, that their needs are met, but also more generally as we look at the different applications coming into all of our programs. And we're really proud of the record we are building up of making sure that underserved and overburdened communities see at least their fair share of the funds.
Thank you for pronouncing Barry correctly.
I did my best. Thanks.
When we are also getting to the point where funds are being distributed, how will the city coordinate with some of these really small communities that maybe only have one or two people actually working for the municipality? We don't have many resources.
Yeah. I'll editorialize briefly and then phone a friend with our Federal Highway Administrator who's going to be overseeing that process. But I'll just mention two things. One, it's very important to us to be user-friendly for smaller communities because having been the mayor of a relatively small city, in the grand scheme of things, knocking on the door of the USDOT, I know what that can be like. The second thing is I want to acknowledge the work of our team on the ground. We have federal highway personnel who are based here in Vermont. They can't even work in their normal office because what happened to the federal building, and VTrans is hosting them. And they've built relationships that I think are going to be part of the glue that makes all that possible. But let me take the liberty of inviting Shaylin to share a little more about how that process works in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. The Secretary is exactly right, and I think his experience being a mayor, he understands how important it is to get those resources directly to the communities that are hardest hit. Our division staff that is based here will be reaching out, working closely with VTrans to find out where those folks are. If there are local communities that need help, we have LTAP, our local technical assistance programs that are available. So our message is to communities big and small, the federal government is here to help and will provide. Sure. Shaylin, S-H-A-I-L-E-N, last name Batt, B-H-A-T-T, and I'm the Federal Highway Administrator.
Mr. Secretary, the administration will be proposing an EV charging tax to accompany the federal gas tax in order to pay for some of the things that need to happen.
One thing that's very important to President Biden is not to introduce new taxes impacting Americans making less than $400,000 a year, and that's something we've held to at the federal level throughout our administration. We know that states are challenged in order to find different ways to fund their roads. Of course, every state has a somewhat different structure in terms of how they do that. Some have introduced a fee on EVs that's designed to offset the gas tax that people are not paying, but it's really going to depend from state to state. Gap in the Highway Trust Fund. There remains a longer-term question.
memory or message will you take back to Washington from the affected areas that you saw today?
You know, when you see that, that hotel in Hardwick that was cut in half and carried down the river, when you see the impact on the road near Woodbury, when you see the railroad tracks coming out of Barry, where the track is still there, but the ties under it are gone, and you know a train's not going to be able to run over that, you see just how urgent it is to make sure these communities get the help that they need. But I would add, when you see everybody from the local select person to property owners to state legislators to the leadership team here, the governor and federal representatives, all standing together working through how to do that, you see the kind of cooperation that makes it possible for us to be a good partner at the federal level. So there's no question in my mind that the resilience and the determination of these communities will get them through this. In particular, it was poignant to see that rail trail, which is more than just a nice thing to have. It could be an economic engine in this region that I know the governor was looking forward to inaugurating. I'll just ask that you all save me an invitation when you do get it up and running, because that's, I think, going to be a great symbol of the resilience of the communities here when that is introduced and with all the economic benefit that's going to bring.
Mr. Secretary, in terms of climate change, as you mentioned, taking a toll on infrastructure, but also communities as well, how should communities in Vermont, but more broadly Americans, be thinking about rebuilding, and should we be rebuilding in the same place?
Well, look, we can't go into the future requiring communities to put everything back exactly the way it was if a 100-year flood is about to become an annual event. If your road gets washed out and we have you put it right back the way it was and then it gets washed out again, are we really going to repeat that? And the idea of programs like Protect is to build smarter and to prepare this infrastructure for the future. We don't have time to get caught up in political and ideological debates about this. It is upon us now, and we need to respond now. And we're going to rebuild in different ways now. And that's already part of our approach, whether we're talking about emergency response or the long-term vision under President Biden's leadership for this infrastructure reconstruction. And you're going to see that continue to be a hallmark of the work we do on projects across the country.
Can you talk about the long-term cost of repeated reaction to a natural catastrophe like this? 12 years, we had another one, now we have another one. Philadelphia, another crisis. How much can we take and how much toll is it taking the federal government?
Well, there's no question that this is not only costing taxpayers through the federal government, but it's costing the homeowners and the business owners. Even if 100% of them knew that they would be made 100% whole financially, which is far from certain, there would still be the upheaval and the disruption that so many people are facing. And it's really remarkable that there was not more loss of life, and that too is a credit to first responders. So we see the very impacts and harms that we've been warned about for some time upon us right now. The question is, how are we going to respond? For transportation, it means making sure transportation is less of a contributor to the problem for the future, which is why we're building smarter and greener for the future. But it's also just facing reality and knowing that these things are happening whether we acknowledge them or not, and designing and building in ways that incorporate that and make us stronger so that you don't have to deal with it in the ways that we have been forced to in the years leading up to this point. Right.
And can you give us your personal reaction to see the devastation as a human being?
Well, it's heartbreaking to talk to the owners of that inn who described what they had put into building a business that was not just a business, but part of the economic recovery of that region around Hardwick, or to see with the pride of a former mayor who loves new infrastructure assets, the brand spanking new bridge that was part of the gravel trail that we saw that was torn in half by the power of those floodwaters. It's a reminder of the extreme nature of the weather events that are happening more and more often, and the human impact of what happens here. But again, I'm also going to be going back to Washington this evening with optimism about how this community, these communities and their leaders can respond and come back stronger than ever. And of course, we want to be a big part of helping with that process. Governor, I'll leave it to you to have the last word.
Thank you all very much, and I really do want to give my sincere thanks to Secretary Pete and his team, and all of the SEOC teams, all the folks in recovery, VTrans, Swiftwater Rescue, and everyone for pulling together during these tough times. And we saw it when we were out on the road today, and people willing to step up, even having damaged themselves, but willing to help others get through their difficulties. So again, it says a lot about Vermont, and I'm tremendously proud to be your governor. But we have a long road ahead, and we'll get through it with the help of the federal. The Biden administration has been really, really essential and very cooperative in trying to send the message to us that they're here with us, and they're going to help us see this through. So again, I want to thank you for coming, and look forward to you coming back to the rail trail opening. You can do the 93 miles with me. And
Maybe I'll do about half there. We'll see how that goes.
don't let him.